Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Richard Slater, and I'm the publisher of Lancashire Business View magazine. I'll be sharing the hosting duties today with Mike Stevens, the BBC's political man in Lancashire. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Lancashire Property Conference, which we are proud to present in association with Blackpool Council and with Harrison Drury Solicitors. Here today, we have gathered property professionals and experts from across Lancashire. Those involved in making the big decisions, those responsible for implementing the big decisions, and those who will benefit from them, and those whose job it is to deliver them. I'm also delighted to welcome guests from a little further afield, though some have obvious connections with our county. And I look forward to hearing Mike's conversations today with Wayne Hemingway, Emily Handslip, and Simon Quin. We'd like you to be part of that conversation too, and please feel free to join in on Twitter or on LinkedIn with the hashtag LPC20, or send questions for our guests and our panel through the chat facility on your interface. We'll be opening up for networking at the very end of the event, which will be unstructured and magnificently chaotic, I hope. So please feel free to stick around for that. Our job today is to get under the skin of the challenges and the opportunities for the county in three key areas of the property market.
Yeah, so firstly, we are going to focus on the housing mix. We're going to be asking lots of questions. Are we building the right homes in the right places for the needs of our future workforces? Are we innovating to utilise eco-building techniques? Do homes need redesign to accommodate increased home working? Then we will explore the future of the office. Some have sounded the death knell for the traditional office environment. Others believe the office's best days are yet to come. So we're going to be asking what the implications are for the commercial property sector. And finally, we will put city living and the high street under the microscope. So for each subject area, we will first hear from a guest speaker, an expert in the field, before moving on to a panel discussion on that subject. The conversations today will then form the basis of an extended property feature in the next edition of Lancashire Business View magazine. So speakers, panellists, our readers and our editor are depending on you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin by welcoming our sponsors today, without whom none of this will be possible. From Blackpool Council, welcome Growth and Prosperity Programme Director Nick Gerard. And from Harrison Drury, please welcome Executive Chairman John Chesworth. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today? Mr. Chesworth, I'd like you to switch on your sound, please. Mr. Gerard, good morning to you. Nick, could you tell me what you and Blackpool Council are hoping to take away from this conference? What are you here to learn?
Well, I think we're facing very challenging times, but whilst all the focus is on surviving at the moment, we're very much looking to the future as well and how we come out of this. So I think today with the panels that we've got, with the expert speakers that we've got and the range of themes that we're dealing with, I'm hoping that myself, but also all of those who are taking part, will actually be better equipped. Because for me, this is all about thinking about the future. Whilst there's a huge amount of attention obviously going on dealing with the present, but it's about the future prosperity and growth and opportunity for the residents and businesses of Lancashire.
Thank you very much. And John Chesworth from Harrison Drury, what would you like to be your takeaway from this project today, John?
I think it's inspiration, Richard. I think the property sector has the power to galvanise the whole economy. And society generally, actually. I was driving just by the UCLan redevelopment, which was partially reopened over the weekend. And my kids looked out the window and saw the plaza sort of emerging there. And they said, wow, this is happening in Preston. And it's got that ability to really rejuvenate and inspire the rest of the economy by seeing progress, seeing things happening. And as Nick said, whilst we're in a situation at the moment where we've been thinking about survival, we've got to be inspired about the future. And I think the property sector really has the ability to do that.
And, if you had a starter phrase, Nick, what would you like to say to our audience before we get going?
I think one of the big lessons that we've learned of late in Blackpool and seen the fruits of it is perseverance. Do not give up. You know, have a clear vision and stick with it and persevere with it despite setbacks.
Never ever give up. It's a good place to start, is that? John, what would you like to say to our audience before we get moving?
I think the property sector is full of can-do attitude, and we're in uncertain times now, but that brings opportunities. And you know, we've got opportunities to make the places where we live and work to be so much better for the future. So it's looking with a really optimistic view of the chances that we've got, and when we get those chances that come along, let's make sure we're making our places better.
Thanks, John. Well, let's hope that today's the start of many, many interesting conversations. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, John.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Our first guest this morning was born in Morecambe. He grew up in Blackburn and has placed Lancashire at the heart of everything he's done since. He created the fashion label Red or Dead. He sat on the trustee board of the Design Council, and he started the National Festival of Making right here in Lancashire. In 1999, he set up HemingwayDesign, which specialises in affordable and social design. I'm pleased to say this morning we are joined by Wayne Hemingway, MBE. Good morning, Wayne. So Wayne, tell us how, first of all, how have the past 6 months been for you? There we go. I think we've got you now, Wayne. Wayne, good morning. How have the past 6 months been for you?
You've switched me off. I'm back on now.
There we go. We've got you now.
Right, you're sounding very distant as well. You're gonna have to say that again. Can you hear me okay?
I'll shout to you, Wayne.
Oh, I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
There we go. Wayne, tell us first of all, how have the past 6 months been for you?
Well, probably like for a lot of people, not what you want to be experiencing. You know, from both in your personal experience of you know, being locked down is not much fun, is it? From a business point of view, being locked down is not much fun. We're lucky at HemingwayDesign because we, you know, we've managed to keep making profit, not the same kind of profits that we've made before. We've not had to make anybody redundant, and we won't be making anybody redundant, and we've continued to stay busy. But we've delivered some, you know, like the Good Business Festival, and we've delivered quite a lot of projects, including urban design, housing projects, big festivals that I'm very proud of. But I want it all to end and end fast, but obviously that's not happening.
And you mentioned the Good Business Festival there. Tell us a little bit about
that. Well, we won a bid to create a global event that was based in Liverpool, but is a proper global event, paid for originally by Levelling Up money that was given to Liverpool to create this thing called the International Business Festival, which took place, and then this is totally replaced, and there's no DNA left from the International Business Festival. And it was basically creating the world's first global event for purposeful business. I think hopefully most people listening to this who are business people will understand that the days of just thinking about shareholder value and return on capital employed have long gone, and especially during the pandemic, the brands that have shown more purpose and thought more about societal benefit are the ones that have been making the most noise and have been getting the most plaudits from a generation, well, 3 generations now, who are worse off than their parents, you know, the millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Alphas, and are expecting change from businesses. So it's what it's all about. And we had some fantastic partners in it, from MasterCard to Coca-Cola to Deloitte to Ipsos and Mori, you know, just some massive world brands who are all part of the team. And we between us, we delivered something pretty impactful, I think, and it will continue now for quite a long time.
And I know we're still sort of in the middle of the pandemic at the minute, but in terms of going forward, where does the industry go from here?
Well, we've been through the pandemic. We've been doing some pretty large scale engagement and surveys through Ipsos Mori. So it's been paid for by St Modwin, who are a developer who we work with, like a medium-sized developer. And what's coming out of it is phenomenally interesting. You know, there is a real desire from the main future house buying market, which are, you know, millennials, which basically are just on late 30s to just coming up to 40, and Gen Zs, which go from 25 up to I think it's 31 now. It obviously changes every year, the year of what you are a Gen Z. And what they're saying is they are generally unhappy with new homes in terms of flattered developments that have been built over the last few years. You know, there's been this feeling that obviously fresh air and green space has become more important to people's lives than ever before. There was a trend towards that anyway. I don't think anything that COVID has done or is doing anything more than accelerating the direction of travel anyway of society. But what's happened is with people being stuck in, you know, quite a lot of city centre, and we're talking about a national problem here, which includes Manchester, Liverpool and Leeds, of city centre properties that are too small to swing a cat, which have not been thought about in terms of quality of life and well-being, and have been thought about that, you know, bottom line, get on the land, get off the land as fast as possible, and make as much profit as you can. Well, people have recognised what's going on, and it hasn't been, you know, and that's been aided by Grenfell and the other things that have happened. And so this research showed that homes with outdoor space are what people aspire to. People want to own homes. Young people are not that enamored with build to rent or buy to rent, whichever way you want to put it, which the industry thinks is the future. Well, it might be the future for developers to maximize profit, but it's not the future if they want to create a happy customer base and a balanced society. Young people are saying that they're happy to move up to 37 miles from city centres, which takes you way outside of suburbs, if they've got good public transport, and if that means that they get quality of life in terms of garden space, access to green spaces, obviously walking the dog, settling down and having kids, all of those things that lead to a good life and well-being. Now this changes massively. You know, when I was part of CABE, Commission for the Architecture and the Built Environment, and then I think it was in 1999 when Richard Rogers, or was it Sir Norman Foster? Richard Rogers, I think, did Towards an Urban Renaissance, and it was about the idea of making sure that we built sustainably, densely, and build well in our city centres in order to make sure that, you know, our towns worked better, that our public transport worked better, that we didn't build on the green belt, all of those things which were exactly right. But because we did it wrong with greed, people are rebelling. And that means that's why Boris, you know, with his build, is scaring the bejesuses out of the green belt, you know, and rightly so, scaring the bejesuses out of CPRE, Wild England, and all of those things. But he is reacting to the fact that we've made a mess in parts of our cities.
And you say that we did it wrong back then through greed. How do we fix that now?
Well, stop being bloody greedy for a start. You know, number one is having a government and a planning system that absolutely can stop developers winning on appeal. That can act, and Homes England, I've been talking to them a lot recently and working with them a lot, and they are really going for this. That they are creating a set of values which are very strong and very purposeful, and they are saying that you have to any developer that works with them has to have their values, has to share those values. How good they are at going to be policing that is another question, because we've got a history of saying one thing in this country and not delivering on it. But if they stick to this, then any developers who, the Persimmons of this world, who, and I know that they've got to change now. That's why they're doing their big research projects. But in some of those big developers and little developers who think that the housing industry is to serve them to make the highest profits and not to serve the public, will not get the land that they need to survive.
And you talk about everything we do, we need to have a certain set of values running through it. That's sort of been the case for you, hasn't it? Through every venture you've had, right through from Red or Dead to HemingwayDesign, it's always been about kind of having those values. Yeah,
well, I was born in Morecambe, brought up there for a while, and then in Blackburn, and single parent family, my nan and my pop involved, and they, I always remember Mum saying, you're on this earth to leave this place a better place for the people who follow you, and you've got to look after yourself. You've got to make sure that you've got enough money to live, but you get to it. But you should never be greedy. You should know when enough is enough, and you should know that if you're lucky enough to create value for other people, you should do it. And that's how I was brought up. And why wouldn't we do that as human beings? And I never understand. But the world has changed, and it's changed so fast. You only have to look back however many years it was, 12, 15 years, till Philip Green, when he had that absolutely obscene toga party on a Greek island, flying in Beyonce for his 13-year-old boy's party and Rod Stewart for his wife's birthday or something. And that was in the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail, obviously, like it does do, fating that, saying, isn't it great to be rich? Well, even now the Daily Mail will, as if they never said that, will write about the fact of that, wasn't that disgusting, wasn't that out of step with society? So if the Daily Mail can change, which it is doing, it bloody has to change, then society is changing, absolutely for sure. And now, Philip Green is not a hero anymore; he's a pariah of society.
And in terms of doing more to kind of make the industry greener, what can we do to make housing eco-friendly?
Well, I think the eco-friendly side of it has had so much attention, and they have become so much greener in simple things that you don't really see and don't get talked about, like condensing boilers have been with us like 25 years, maybe more now. And so I think we're on that journey and it is only a matter of time before, there's those prototype type Tesla roofs that developers build homes where the roofs provide all the energy. We'll get there on that, in the same way that in time we'll all have electric cars. And the government are going to stop that, stop the world, well, stop Britain building internal combustion engines from 2030. They're saying now, so we're not that far away from that, and we're not that far. I actually don't think. I think it might even be in my lifetime. And I'm 59 when housing is possibly zero carbon as a norm. But there is much more to sustainability than just environmental. Remember, there's social sustainability and economic sustainability. And social sustainability, we are a long way from at the moment. How many developments give people the opportunity to start a business? How many homes are built that are totally flexible and have taken into account the fact of home working? It shouldn't have taken a pandemic to do that. It was pretty obvious that the world was going in that direction. BT started allowing people to work from home 15, 16 years ago. Progressive companies have been doing that for a long, long time, but the housing hasn't kept up with that. And then when it comes to economic sustainability, we're still in a place of absolute greed, where I know it's not the case in Lancashire so much, but if M25 in London right now, if you manage to be a landowner, if you own a farm within the M25, and there are loads that the M25 isn't all built up within it, contrary to opinion, it's got absolutely tons of green space. If you're lucky to be a farmer there, and you get planning permission for homes to be built on your land, you get a 200% uplift. £10,000. What's 200 times £10,000 per acre? I don't even want to think about it. It becomes from £10,000 an acre or a hectare to 200 to millions. and yet we actually allow that, and that means then that the house builder pays these crazy prices, the highest bidder wins it, and then because they've paid so much, they deliver a pile of crap, and that, you know, so the whole thing just doesn't, the system doesn't work. But it could change, you know. In Holland right now and in Denmark, they cap land uplift. They cap it in some cities at 30%, in others at 50%, and that makes it more of a level playing field, and also makes quality to be able to be afforded.
And Wayne, you yourself have got a housing project in Blackburn. We've had a question from Bipin Patel, who says, Wayne, what would you share to convince the London-centric to venture past Watford and to visit Blackburn and the rest of Lancashire?
Well, I do know, you know, it's obvious right now that you can't fail to have seen it in the news that they've realised, central government have realised that they've forgotten the North for too long. And it's not just this government, it's Labour government as well, you know, famously, well, whether it's true or not, but Tony Blair said, you know, we don't really have to, evidently used to say, we don't really have to bother about the North because, you know, they'll vote for us anyway, you know. And so, you know, it's cross-party, this ignoring, but it's come home to roost, hasn't it? You know, what's going on in the pandemic again is just, and it's taken a pandemic to kind of bring the levelling up agenda right to the fore, rather than just something that wins some votes at an election. So I think we'll see. I don't think it's going to be like it was before. I think if ever a time where the North can flex its muscles and change this and do, you know, levelling up, then it's going to be now. So I feel very positive. And countries that are more level just feel better. You know, you think of Germany and you don't think of Berlin or any city dominating, do you? You think of so many great cities, and I think we've got to get back to that, because we have got, you know, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds. They are great cities, but they have been they've had the short end of the wedge. That's the wrong saying. They've had one of them wedges wrong, one of them straws wrong.
Wayne,
thin end of the wedge.
That's the one. Wayne, thank you for joining us. I know you're going to stick around for another 10 minutes or so. That's Wayne Hemingway.
Well, just one thing to say, though. One thing to say.
Go on.
That you called it our development in Blackburn, Green Hills. It's Kingswood Homes from Preston who have been absolutely brilliant, and you know, and it's been it's been great working with them. So you know, it's not our development. The reason why it's so successful is because it's an SME, a small local developer, and I think I'm allowed to say it. When you do that, developers don't shit on their own doorstep, and you know, you're bound to take more care if you do something in an area that you're from, that you care about, you know, if you're part of the community, and that's what we don't do enough in housing. We let developers get away with not being part of the community, and I think even on giant developments, if you can always have a national developer, but right next to them a local developer, it can have massive positive impacts.
Wayne, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to speak to you. That's Wayne Hemingway, MBE.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Wayne. You just remind me of my favourite catchphrase, which is, if you can buy it in Lancashire, buy it in Lancashire. So thanks for that, Wayne. Next up is our Sustainable Homes and the Housing Mix panel. Wayne's staying with us, but would you please welcome, to add to this mighty list of voices from Lancashire, David Price, Group Director at Tenacia. Good morning, David. Gary Willis, Design Director at Aldrock. Good morning to you. David Galvin, Managing Director at Blackpool Housing Company. Morning to you. And Alban Cassidy, Director at Cassidy and Ashton. Good morning to you. Welcome all. I'd like to start with this question, if I may, and I'd like it to direct it, please, to Alban Cassidy. Alban, how do we anticipate future housing needs and then deliver them?
Have I got 3 hours?
No, you've got a week.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the prediction of future housing needs has been a major issue for not just society as a whole, but the planning profession, of which I am one, obviously for decades. We've gone from regional projections to local projections to a government coming in with a standard method, and it's all number crunching. And I think we need to go back to obviously taking account of populations and economic growth, etc. But look at what the communities want and look for more cooperation, and actually have, rather than just look at the immediate local area, look at the market. For example, we just recently, Fylde and Wyre have been progressing their local plans over the last couple of years, and it was intended that they would work together under the duty of cooperation. But inspectors and successive inspectors said, oh, well, they're ahead of us, so we can't take account of them, and then we can't take account of them because they're ahead of us. So you need local cooperation. So I would suggest, I would advise, if not housing market areas, a regional approach to this again. I think that's the best way forward.
Thank you very much. David Price, if I may come to you at 10 Asia. You operate in a smaller volume, higher value area of the market. How do you anticipate future needs, and then how do you model your business around the needs of the county and the other locations where you operate, David?
So I think it's an interesting question. I'm coming from it at a slightly different viewpoint, in the sense of I'm a developer, and our role within the community is to actually deliver those housing needs. So off the back of what Alban's saying there, Alban's more of in a position where they forecast what the demand is for the UK and what's needed. And let's say, for example, that the government has given us as developers and a nation an aim of 300,000 houses a year. I think the actual important question on that is how we deliver that, and not how we establish those numbers, because we are failing every year on year. So there's a compound negative effect year on year that we are not hitting 300,000 houses a year. So let's, for the moment, accept that we've understood how many houses we need to develop. The actual, in my opinion, the more important question is how we develop that. And in our opinion, the stark way of why we're failing to deliver 300,000 houses a year is a neat example of typical 80-20 rule, Pareto's law. Of, if you look at the UK, off the back of what Wayne was saying as well, there's a stronghold of 5 big players in the industry, your likes of Redrow, Persimmons, Taylor Wimpey's, etc., that will produce 80% of the UK's housing mix. Whereas if you look at the model of Australia, for example, that's completely flipped on its head. So 80% of their housing mix is actually developed by probably 80% of their companies and house builders. So what we've actually got here is a very small group of very high powerful companies developing across the UK. That's only a small number of them. Whereas I think from a developer's point of view, if we had support from opening up help from the government for smaller developers to get planning on smaller pockets of land that the big house builders don't want to undertake because it's not as feasible for them. So anything under 20 units, there's a huge opportunity to do what Wayne was suggesting about producing higher quality homes from developers within local regions, if they can have access to smaller pockets of land.
Thank you very much, David. Yeah. Thank you. David Galvin, if I can come to you, please. Perhaps you could just set the scene a little bit for us in terms of what the Blackpool Housing Company is.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's quite interesting listening to Wayne and David there talk about what drives the dynamics of development. We're working in areas where, I guess, traditional developers fear to tread, working in the inner area of Blackpool with the existing built environment. And what we're primarily concerned with is what that offer is to residents. It's basically former holiday flats, former B&Bs converted very poorly into residential accommodation. So our mission is to go in there and actually reduce density, increase amenity, strengthen the sustainability of those homes, both in terms of supporting the people who live in them to sort of stabilise their lives, put some roots down. Big problem with transients in that community, the sort of HMO market, if you like. So there's a big economic drive to try and strengthen people's ability to secure a decent home from which they can then retrain or train or gain employment, but also to actually change the dynamics of that market, which has been driven over the years by greed, I guess, by speculative investors getting into that market for the yield from housing benefit. And it's been no sort of secret the HMO market went wrong in Blackpool and has left a legacy that we're now attempting to address incrementally. And I guess our challenge is scale and getting it to scale. And we're doing exactly the opposite of working. We looked at a JV approach with a big partner and decided to go down the route of stimulating the SME market. So we've got frameworks where we're employing literally hundreds of local people through small business, small contractors to help us deliver our agenda.
Thank you, David. David, can I just move you along there? So the anticipation of future needs is literally what you do for a living. Delivering against that, where do the frustration points come when you're trying to deliver against such an ambitious, just an ambitious ambition?
Yeah, I mean, we're working commercially, so the frustration is, what we can take on and what we can't really. We've got limitations in what we can do because we're not grant funded at the moment, although we are going down the route of establishing a subsidiary housing association to give us some assistance there to provide under the definition of pure affordable housing. But what we're doing is providing a form of that for a commercial vehicle. And I guess its scale is a frustration. We're a regeneration type vehicle, yet we don't have the support that once went with that in the past in terms of enabling funds to acquire and potentially demolish buildings. So we're very constrained by what we can acquire at the right price point, and then turning it into a decent home for somebody who lives in that area, rather than having to those people having to hop from one poor quality landlord to another.
Thank you very much. Wayne, can I come to you? This is an audience question, and this is from John Bridge, who's an architect at Studio John Bridge. And the question is, how can we influence eco design and build when we've got a recession facing us?
Well, I've never said, I don't believe that creativity and thinking is based on how much money you've got. What we can't do is, what we can't afford to do is to slip back and not think about those things. We'd be absolutely, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of a non-question, because what we can't allow ourselves to do is to slip back in the slightest, just on the argument that there's a recession happening and likely to deepen. We have to use the creativity that we've got available to us, and also we have to remember as well that sometimes that this could be we've got to accept it could be a paradigm shift in the kind of margins that we all have to accept. I find it quite worrying that having been in a couple of industries in my life, or more than a couple, but let's say the first one, which was the fashion industry, which is an industry that's kind of, in a way, not that important, can be classed as frivolous, not vital. It's obviously good to look good and makes you feel better and all of that. But if you reached a 10% return on capital employed, a 10% ROCE, then, which is what the big French and the Italian big houses do, you'll be classed as a really, really successful business. Persimmon and Wimpey delivering housing, which is way, way, way more important to our well-being than a blouse or a frock, get a 20% return on capital employed. And, the argument that we can't, number one, build better houses, more sustainable houses that are better for well-being, just doesn't stack up, because the profits that they're making could be considered to be obscene compared to other industries.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Gary Willis, Design Director at Old Rock. Are we building the right homes in the right places?
To answer that simply, Rachel, it's no and no. I think in both accounts. Obviously, just hearing the latest kind of study that Wayne's got sight of, people, it's standard. People don't want the new home. You can look at various studies out there at the moment, the Reaver's Case for Space, and obviously a lot of the work that Cave have done. People don't want a new home at the moment. Why do they not want a new home? there's various reasons. One of them is largely space, and you know this is down to, again, without beating up the large PLCs, but largely it's down to a profit-driven model. You know, houses back in the 20s were at a certain size, and we're back at that size now. You know, in the 20s and the 30s kind of size of house. So space is a massive issue, and in terms of the right homes, they need to be far more adaptable. We've obviously got an aging population. We've got obviously the work from home, which, as Wayne mentioned, that's always been around. You know, people have been working from home more and more as the years have gone by, not just through COVID. So no, we're not building the right homes, and we're certainly not building them in the right places, unfortunately, as well.
And so, by which measure do you decide that, and what do you do about it next?
Well, I think first and foremost, the right places, we need to, you know, try and look at a little bit more of a holistic approach rather than it being driven by just using up Greenbelt. You know, what I see is a spread of development outward from town and city centre, and it almost leaves a black hole, you know, in the centre of these towns that become unsustainable. So it needs to be a more concerted approach, really, in terms of the right places and the right homes. It needs to be more policy driven, and, you know, reinforced a lot better at the planning process, because I find that these elements are almost add-ons, or, you know, just an afterthought.
Thank you very much, David Price. Can I come back to you, please? We were talking earlier about the affordability, I guess, of eco-design, but I think when Wayne was giving his answer there, I was reflecting on what Wayne said earlier, which is about holding true to your values. How do you see this, David? David Price.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think as developers, we always have to follow policy, and if from a top-down point of view, that policy is encouraged by decision makers, it makes our lives easier to then develop more eco-friendly design, which again comes back onto Wayne's point of increasing quality as a developer. The two massive encouraging points that we've experienced as just a very small developer is we've had first-hand experience the likes of Preston Council as standard, making new build developers go 19% higher than building regs straight away just to get planning permission. So it's very encouraging as point number one, that's fed down from a local council level, which I believe they are the only council in the UK to do so. So we've got a lot of positivity there to shout about. The second point is that support from a top-down level is coming from the likes of bank and who we actually bank with. Personally, we bank with Lloyds. The support has been absolutely phenomenal, and they are encouraging eco-design and actually adding to our feasibility of being able to introduce that to our schemes by potentially waiving the fees that it takes for a developer to raise finance from the likes of Lloyds or banks. And that has been encouraged and a message given to us without asking. And from a developer's point of view, one of our next projects, that is actually Lloyds themselves leaving 70 grand on the table to waive a fee if we can hit a certain eco design, which puts it in like a code for sustainability bracket. So it's massively encouraging for us that the areas that we operate in, the council is supporting eco design and the leading from the top. And then from developers' point of view, we can then actually implement that by having supports from the banks.
Thank you very much. Alban, can I come to you again, Alban? This is a question in from one of our attendees. This is from Tom Grattan, who I think is in Lancaster. He says it like this: do you think local authority planning departments have the vision and ability to radically change living? And then what he's talking about is building around people rather than cars, amending planning so that it's from 1 or 2 cars per house to half a car per house to encourage the use of public transport. How much do you feel that's the responsibility of your sector, Alban?
Another question that could deserve a lengthy reply.
These literally, we've been writing dissertation questions all morning to see if you can answer them.
The local authorities have the talent and they have the skills. What they don't have always is the tools. The planning system has been so housing led over the last decade or so, which is essentially, if there's a housing shortage in there, then generally it's likely that housing will be approved if the site is generally appropriate, to describe it in layman's terms. But when you actually work with a local authority that have the opportunity to go a bit further, and I would say, for example, Blackpool and Fylde are example of these, where we've worked closely on the Windac Farm development, and we've got approval for 1,400 houses under the government's Healthy New Town scheme. And that's one very much, it's access to transport, it's access to health facilities, access to shops, to school, incorporating public transport within the development. But there is an element that the scale has allowed that to happen. And so it is an integrated mixed use development, but very much Fylde and Blackpool were leaders within that, and were very keen and very excited to still be involved in that. So they can do it, but they need to be given the tools to do so.
Thank you very much, sir. Gary Willis, I'm just going to wrap us up with this panel in just a moment. Gary Willis, to you, what would you want to see happen next?
Well, that is a big question as well. That could take all day long, but I think we need much more support from the government, certainly from a policy point of view. It seems to me that most housing development, has to tick a certain amount of boxes, and that's it. It doesn't have to go over and above, and that's targeted at larger developments really more than anything. So I think we need a change of policy. I think the government accepts that it needs a change of policy, and it's about getting these policies through and making sure that they're enforced locally. So
thank you very much. And David Galvin, if you had a magic wand to wave that was to the benefit of your end users, what would that magic wand be?
I guess it's as I say, it's getting traction on scale in the centre of Blackpool, and I'm sure there are many areas where stock in that town or city is almost redundant to its current use, and we need to repurpose the existing built environment either through selective demolition or through more imaginative funding arrangements and backed by government. We need to get scale, we need to get traction, and there's an intrinsic link between the accommodation in those areas and the success of local businesses, so it's key that we get it right.
Thank you. And finally, Wayne Hemingway, I'll come to you to close this. If your elevator pitch manifesto, what needs to change?
Well, first thing would be to allow planners to do their job properly, and for it to be a heroic profession like it can be and like it should be. And in that respect, then it would keep attracting the skills that it needs. But at the moment, if you're going to lose so many battles, then it's probably, and you've got a choice to go into another area, you might choose to do that. And then secondly, I would allow either Homes England or a body or another body that could do something like CABE used to do, to be independent of spirit and to be a critic of government and a critic of the industry, and give them a voice and to be able to do that. At the moment, the industry is not really being held to account like it used to be.
Wayne, thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you, David Price, David Galvin, Auburn Cassidy, Gary Willis, and of course, Wayne Hemingway. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Richard. And do remember, if you want to join in the conversation, if you've got any questions for any of our panelists or any of our guests, you can use the chat function on Zoom to submit those. And also you can join in the conversation on social media by using the hashtag LPC20. We're now going to talk about the future of the office, and our next guest is responsible for looking after some of the most eye-catching developments of the past decade, from the iconic Fort Dunlop complex in Birmingham to the transformation of the old Royal William Yard Naval Base in Plymouth. I'm pleased to say we're joined by the Commercial Director of Urban Splash, Emily Handslip. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning.
How have the past 6 months been for you?
Eye-opening. I'm not going to say it's been easy for our office portfolio, but we've really grouped together as a team. We formed a customer service business support team, and we decided that we were going to deal with each and every one of our office occupiers on a case-by-case basis in a very human manner, and we had to very quickly form that team and ensure that we were there pretty much 24/7 for all of our customers. Coupled with that, we manage our own buildings, our own offices, own office spaces across the country. So we had to put into force our health and safety side, and make sure that our sites were comfortable and safe as well. It's been difficult.
And it's not just you as a business that have had to change the way you've worked. It's everybody, isn't it? It's the whole of society. Yes,
absolutely. And actually, I think the office workspace evolution had started to happen. I think it was evolving, and then suddenly COVID and the pandemic hit, and what was due to probably happen over time happened overnight. So I think it was a shifting market anyway. Breakout spaces started to come in. Coffee shops have started to appear on the ground floor, and people were starting to work from home. But the rest sort of happened very quickly overnight.
And in terms of planning ahead for businesses, has it been sort of unhelpful, this kind of shift particularly from the government, in this message from work from home if you can, everybody get back to work from home if you can? Has that kind of scuppered any chance of kind of medium to long-term planning?
I think it's affected probably a certain sector within our portfolio anyway, perhaps our co-working spaces. But generally, I feel that our businesses have sort of determined their own route to a certain extent. Our sites are not at full occupancy, obviously. There's a lot of people working from home. I think each business has embraced their own charter with their people at heart. I feel it's probably affected the smaller co-working sort of desk by desk operators most, but the other businesses have forged their own way, really.
And in terms of kind of getting through things at the minute, is it about landlords and tenants kind of working together to come up with a suitable arrangement?
Absolutely. From day one, we decided as a firm that Urban Splash were going to stand shoulder to shoulder with our occupiers. We're not a huge fund. It's very much people at the heart of what we do, and we wanted to be remembered more for the way that we had dealt with people, rather than sort of what had happened. So it's been labour of love. I can pretty much tell you how each and every one of our tenants are getting on and what they're doing and the individual concerns. But we felt it would be very reflective of our business if we were to deal with it on a case-by-case basis rather than give a blanket answer, which has allowed us to apply a more tailored approach to each occupier, which in turn has given us some great asset management opportunities. We've had some tenants get smaller, but others move into the space. It's been hands-on, it's been hard work, but it's been actually very rewarding in many respects, and the relationships have really built. And hand in hand with that, we've also still been doing new office transactions. I would say that the larger transactions have slowed their re-space planning, but we are still doing deals every month. So it's not been as catastrophic yet, although I do believe that we're yet to see the true reflection of what's happened on the office market. I think businesses are probably going to be driving this decision, and I do think that people are going to be at the heart of it all. I think we crave culture and community, connection. So I think we will see a natural shift to people wanting to go back to the office. But that office needs to inspire people, I think. And I think the space that we work in, the public realm around us, is going to play even more of an important role moving forward.
Remember, if you've got any questions for Emily, you can submit them in the chat box below. We've had a question from Nick Gerard from Blackpool Council, who says, Emily, is your future focus going to be more on repurposing existing office space or building new?
We have a mixed portfolio of older buildings that have been regenerated and new build. With regard to our office space, we're going to continue to be working them as offices. We're going to be thinking about what we need to put into our spaces to make them safer, brighter, bigger, more spacious. But we won't be repurposing our offices. We'll just be making them even better and adapting them to this change. We're seeing a really interesting shift, I suppose quite quite a natural shift really. But we have a site in called Matchworks in Speke, Garston, Liverpool, which historically has been out of town Liverpool, maybe slightly harder to let. It's been brilliant. We've gone up in occupancy 10% over the last couple of months. We're now sitting at 92% let. That's never been seen before, but it's a space, it's a business park with fantastic outside public realm, landscaping, own front door, huge floor to ceiling heights, which have always been a problem according to fit out firms and agents before, but now it's completely embraced because it's lots of nice fresh air around their staff. So and another scheme we have down in the southwest on the coast has been doing exceptionally well as well with public realm. So I think it's all about adapting to make the people feel secure, safe, more space. Yeah, and working with the needs, I think, of occupiers. I think we, should be creating space that we want to work in, and people will migrate back, I think, in part. But the flexible working needed to happen. I've travelled the country for a long time with my portfolio and been without a office, so to speak, but I've always used our head office as a hub, as a social hub, as a place to connect with people. And I think that's going to be happening a lot with head offices now. Head offices are probably going to be more social hubs, a place to connect into, give us our basic needs as well. And also the training and education of those that are coming through, being hands-on with their managers.
Absolutely. We've got a question from John Bridge, who says, hi, Emily, do you value grade A office space as a means to both entice and provide people a place to work together safely in the future office?
Sorry, is that question, does it have to be grade A? Is that?
Well, the question says, do you value grade A office space? But kind of, how do you value office space kind of in the future?
I value all office space. Our portfolio is a mixed bag. I think that personally, most of our office space is fresh air ventilated. It's not necessarily air conditioning, which you might see with grade A. But I think design in all office space is going to be exceptionally important. We deliver design-led space quite often with natural materials, with the walls, the floors, the ceilings being exposed. That's our type of product. I think there needs to be flexibility in the space. I think when designing offices now, there needs to be flex if developers want to asset manage correctly. I think leases need to be able to flex, and the buildings need to be able to flex accordingly. Otherwise, we're going to end up with large voids if we do need to accommodate downsizing. And
we talked earlier about landlords and tenants working together at the minute.
Yeah.
How important are things like flexible leases in making that arrangement work?
We've always been a firm believer in flexible, simple leases at Urban Splash. I think Tom sort of turned that on its head about 25 years ago now and said, let's keep it simple. And we created our short form lease, which effectively my team deal with in-house. It's a 6-year lease. I think flexibility in those shorter term leases is very important. I also think that the more institutionalized leases are going to have to be more flexible, possibly allowing sharing. I don't think occupiers are going to be signing leases that don't deal with unexpected shocks so easily anymore. We're already starting to see some nice COVID clauses appearing in new leases that we're doing now. So I think flexibility is key, and listening to our tenants speaking, communication, flexibility, customer care is going to be ever more important. And those landlords that perhaps operated in a more old school manner might find it more difficult now. I think it's certainly about working with occupiers.
We've got a question from John Chesworth, who says, hi, Emily, how does the office environment need to change in order to attract businesses and their staff back in?
I think that they need to be comfortable, they need to be secure, they need to be safe. Confidence has to build with, the staff have to be confident and feel comfortable in the space that they're going back into. I think it's important that the offices are adapted to feel more a bit home from home, to be able to walk away from your desk, connect with people, to not be such a rigorous or a defined workspace. I think it needs to blend. I think larger desks, more space, and a more flexible approach to the design. And I think they need to, it's a really good time for the office market to think about innovation, refits. And I think we've all entered into the world of Zoom, as we're on now, and people are connecting in with their teams. Their team aren't all going to be sat around them. So adapting the design of the office space to accommodate with virtual meetings and virtual calls, I think is going to be very important. So pods and fit out small meeting spaces. So
yeah, and earlier on I mentioned the Fort Dunlop complex in Birmingham and Royal William Yard. How important is great design, eye-catching design in attracting tenants?
Probably very biased, but we believe it's exceptionally important. Design's vital. Office space needs to be inspirational. We used to spend more life in our office than we do at home, so we've always had it at the heart of everything we've done. We've compromised on our gross to net to provide beautiful, big, spacious atriums. We love our public realm. We've got outside meeting space in the majority of our buildings already. And we love to work with great architects, push the boundaries. I haven't ever seen any suspended ceilings in any of our space. We like to open up the space, and that still stands. For me, I think it's even more important today, a reason to go into your office and be truly inspired. I think is exceptionally important, especially after we're now going to be dealing with the emotional and physical impact of the pandemic on our workforce. And I think everything around people now in the place that they go to work in is going to be ever more important.
Emily, brilliant to speak to you. Thanks for joining us this morning. That is the Commercial Director of Urban Splash, Emily Handslip.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Emily. Next up, please welcome our look at the offices from a panel perspective. Joining us today, or staying with us, is Emily, but also joining us for this session, would you please welcome Stephen Young, who's Exec Director of Growth at Lancashire County Council, Anthony Chesworth, who's the Chief Exec of EKM, and I can tell you that Anthony is the proud possessor of a slide and a ball pool. We have Caroline James, Director at Trevor Dawson, and we have David Cox from David Cox Architects. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
I wonder if I may start with you, Caroline James. Trevor Dawson, has our relationship with the office changed forever?
I don't think so. Certainly from our point of view, we were very keen to get back as soon as we could, because obviously transacting is our business, and to continue that we need to look at buildings and view buildings. So it was a relief in some respects for the government to say that you could conduct viewings with other parties fairly early on. So we've been really back in the office apart from the first month, and I would endorse everything Emily said in terms of environment, connectivity with everybody, making decisions for small, medium-sized businesses, particularly moving forward, what direction they're going in, what environment they want for everybody, whether it's more flexible working from home or a mixture of the two. I mean, from my point of view, I would go mad working from home. I think it's more difficult for females than males. I don't know whether Emily would agree with me there, but I just couldn't do it. And yet I also think another product of this whole thing is the effect on the younger market, the 20s and 30s in call centres. My daughter, who worked in a call centre, has been at home for 7 months now. She wasn't furloughed, and she's absolutely going mad because she's not interacting with her mates. She can't go out at the weekends. All those sort of things have the mental effects that Emily was alluding to. So I think that's another side of the market, which traditionally would have taken up large areas of offices, which will change definitely going forward.
Thanks very much. Anthony, if I may come to you, you are a keen designer of the modern office space, taking inspiration from across the Atlantic, or perhaps across the Atlantic took inspiration from you. How far do you feel we're going to need to redesign our workplaces, and how are you considering it within your business, Anthony?
It's a bit like Emily was saying. I think most offices, if we're being honest, are a little white box, 4 walls and a brew kitty to look forward to. If people are lucky, you've got to bring money for milk and everything. And then people wonder why people don't like working there. It's like, why would you work there? You've got to make, especially with the world we're in now, the office has to be as good, if not better, than where people live. because you need to attract them in. If this remote working thing is going to continue, you need to attract people to come into your office if you want them in there, because why would you go in if it's worse? So it's as simple as that. Good design is going to be so important, but it was before, exactly like Emily was saying, and it should have been important. You know, if you want people to love what they do and to practice and get better at it, you've got to provide them a nice place to be, not the cheapest, nastiest, horriblest place you can possibly get because it's cheap, it's better for the bottom line. It's not. Look after your people and they'll look after your customers, and then the business will do well.
Thank you very much. Stephen Young from the County Council. You have an awful lot of people who are office-based. How has it been for at a very, very busy time? Let's be honest, a very busy time for our local public sector. How has it been for you fellas with the massive changes in the office?
I mean, it was really challenging. It's interesting, really, because prior to COVID-19 really taking hold of the UK, we've been looking for the last 12 months about moving to a more agile workforce, about people being having the technology and the ability to work remotely because of all the benefits that we felt that would bring. But we always had a mind to keep a kind of an office presence as well. We were never going to move to a completely remote environment. We'd had some challenges culturally in terms of getting from A to B, and then COVID-19 came, and in the space of a weekend, the entire workforce pretty much now works from home. So we're getting about 5,000 or 6,000 people a day logging on and working remotely. So it's been a huge transition. It's happened really quickly. We're now beginning to see the emergence of some of the challenges of people working permanently from home, mental health issues, people working on their own space, and people sort of really losing that sort of contact. So I think like all these new kind of evolving ways in which we work, it will change, it will evolve, new issues will start to come that we hadn't thought of at the start.
Thank you very much. And David Cox of David Cox Architects. David, how far, in your role as an architect, how far do you feel we need to be looking at workspaces and thinking, we got to start again?
I don't think that now is the time to say, let's start again. I think we need to wait for calmer times to take long-term decisions. I think now is the time to build up some determination to make brave decisions when those calmer times do come along. But I think there's a huge potential for looking at things from very elemental principles. As Emily was saying, offices were changing even before the pandemic. This has accelerated it. I think offices are becoming much more interesting spaces. The social side of the office, breakout spaces, coffee rooms, all of those things. I'm not sure about hot desking anymore. I think we need to look at that a little bit more carefully. But I think that the times of white boxes, as Anthony was saying, are long gone, and good riddance. And I think most employers now see the social value of providing a much more interesting range of spaces within their demise.
Thank you, David. Can I remind you all that please just simply send us your questions straight through the Zoom chat box, and we'll pick those up for you. Emily Handslip, may I ask you this? How are commercial landlords adapting? And I appreciate that we are in this very early stages of this, but how are the commercial landlords adapting, and what do you expect them to have to do next?
I think that commercial landlords are going to have to be very human as well. I think they're going to have to deliver a very people-focused customer care. I started to talk about our customers within our portfolio being part of a club and receiving a service, and us being a service provider, much more so than any other industry sector. I think I believe that's the right way to adapt. I think we were already doing that. We'd started that, but now there is no choice. That is the way we move forward, and we need to look after our customers. And I think landlord and tenant, and the words tenant certainly is banned. We have a swear box. It's customers all the way, and that needs to continue. And I think that's the way forward. We have a very, very hands-on team. We manage a lot of our buildings with managing agents behind us at times, with the expertise, but we front a lot of it. We're very human. I think that's the way forward. I think the property industry must move to being more service-led.
Thank you very much. I've got questions here from our audience. The first one I really must direct this one to you, Stephen Young, if I may. And this is from David Kirkham, who's a service development manager with the NHS. And David's question is, what is the strategy for the sale of public sector assets for use in local regeneration and redevelopment?
I mean, you know, there's a clear and emerging strategy. It's emerging quite quickly, certainly in terms of the county council at the moment. We have got too much buildings at the moment. I mean, that's becoming increasingly clear. I think the point that I think Caroline made it at the start, you know, I don't think we'll ever go back to everybody being completely office based in the future. I think there'll be a kind of a mixed economy of people. So we've clearly got too many buildings that we need to look at. A key part of our asset management strategy going forward is to look at how we can use those buildings to kickstart regeneration. So where I'm based in Preston, we're right next to Preston train station, which is a HS2 hub, for example. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to sort of join the dots around that particular one. So, you know, what we don't want to do, I think, is the county council move out of buildings, or other public sector bodies move out of buildings. Then they just become derelict, sat there, and become a real sort of drain on a particular area. So when we are looking to exit buildings, we are looking at what the next use is going to be, how that can then drive regeneration in a particular area, as opposed to just thinking, you know, this will save us a few quid, let's just get rid of it. It can be somebody else's problem.
Thanks, Caroline. That's Stephen describing what's happening in the county. Is that a strategy that you would support, or are there any refinements that you would suggest?
I think anybody embarking on office development is very brave at the moment, and probably that will be the case for several years. So again, Stephen's point about alternative uses, I think there are a large number of town centre buildings, particularly, which are either in the public sector, whether it's NHS or whatever, where there is a potential residential opportunity. And there's several examples of that around our regional towns. I think the cities are a different kettle of fish in terms of what they can offer going forward. But I think certainly the regional towns, if buildings are left, as Stephen said, untouched and unloved, then that has a massive impact upon the immediate environment. And that's not just it's retail, it's hospitality, it's the whole effect. They're all interlinked.
Thank you very much. David Cox, I've got a question here from Aisha Graham, who's a student in our audience. David, how do you predict, and I'm going to be putting a fiver on whatever you say, so this is important. How do you predict the property market will be affected by COVID and Brexit, and the end of the EU transition period, shall we say, in the coming year? And which areas are in the sector are the up and comers?
Well, I think the general question, how is it going to be affected? The answer is badly. The market always reacts badly to uncertainty, and we've got a double uncertainty here. The sectors that are going to be most badly hit are hospitality and leisure, and the sectors which are going to be strongest, I think, are going to be in transport and technology. I think technology is going to be one of the big, really big movers in the next 5 years, because we're going to be looking at a whole range of applications for technology, both physical installations in offices and in the ether, providing better interconnectivity.
Thank you. And if I may bring the same question to you, Emily, again, this is Aisha Graham, our student in the audience. This is her question. How do you predict, or how do you imagine the property market will be affected, and which areas of the property market are you feeling most confident about?
Okay, so I think, sticking with offices for a short while, I think we're going to see a locational strategy change. I don't believe it's the death of offices. I think we're going to see a regional growth. I think we're going to see community growth as well. I think we're going to see community hubs within locations where there might be quite a few home workers that don't want to be sitting in their front room and would like to connect in with other people home working as well. So I think we're going to see some shifts. I do believe in diversity, and I'm a historically retail and leisure agent. So I started out working with Gary Crompton, who's up next, ironically. And I do think that it's very important to diversify So where we have got workspace, why not introduce some leisure, some retail as well, and just try and make, I suppose, challenge what is the norm. We are starting to put mixed hubs into buildings as well, so bringing in some retail and some leisure, and then there just happens to be some desks there. We've got some great space down in Royal William Yard that's very, very similar, where you might have workshops and creative sessions taking place, and then there's a great long bench with hot desking and workspace on as well. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting shift. I think some of the sectors might blend a little. And I do certainly agree that there seems to already be a boom in technology area and alongside gaming and other office occupiers of that nature. I think it's unclear, but
no. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to come to you, Anthony, again, Anthony Chesworth. This is another question that's in. This is from Andrew Roberts, who's the managing director at Tustin Developments, and his question is this. Do you see, and perhaps you could frame this in your context, Anthony, does the panel see shared smaller offices as a longer-term future?
Shared smaller offices, potentially, like the co-working type of thing. Potentially, yeah. I mean, we've took the action now with all our team. Obviously, in March, everyone had to work from home, and we've told them about a month or so ago now that they can work from home forever. So, you know, we've told our entire team, that's an 80-strong team, that they can work from home for the rest of their lives, effectively, while they're at EKM. So for us, yeah, it's going to change it, because we've got that massive office in Preston, you know, £3.5 million development.
She does property letting.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. It's either that or put a Starbucks in at the bottom or something. I don't know what we're going to do with it. But, you know, we've invested all that money into Preston, and now we've just gone and told our entire team they can work from home forever. So yeah, are they going to work in different places? Yeah, because I think, again, like Emily's mentioned and other people have mentioned, like Wayne mentioned previously, not everyone's home environment is the same as your own. So whilst many people on this panelist and many people watching may have, you know, maybe, you know, have a home office or have a nice place to work, there's a lot of people working on a beanbag in the mum's bedroom. And that is not sustainable, is it? So yeah, I think there is going to be a rise of people trying to seek out places to work. But that's if big companies shut their offices as well, remember. So you're going to stop this big commute going in and out. But yeah, there's going to have to be good places to work, isn't there?
Thank you very much, Stephen Young. This one is a little bit parochial, but I'm good with this. And this is a question from John Chesworth, who's obviously got an idea in mind. A question for Stephen. Has the pandemic affected the way in which the County Council is looking at the potential station gateway office-led development in Preston?
Yes and no. It's given us the opportunity to pause and consider what we were originally planning. The appetite to bring that particular development forward is still as strong as ever. The obvious original plans were around large scale grade A office, and I'm not quite sure that's going to be the mix at the end. I think what we want to do and what we still remain strong around is that it's got to be a space where people want to be, whether that be an element of residential within their city centre living with some office space, but taking, you know, account of some of the things that the other panelists have said this morning about it being flexible space, it being kind of, you know, less densely populated is yet to be seen. So we're clearly revisiting all of those things, but like I said, the appetite to see that site come forward is as strong as ever, and I think that's perhaps what's the most important thing.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I think you'd agree, another fantastic panel, great insight from you all, and that's appreciated. And I would say, you can't hear it, our guests and panelists, I'm sorry about that, but myself and Michael can very much hear the applause coming this way from across the county. So thank you all for your contribution. Mike.
Yes, and John Bridge has been in touch on Twitter. He says, Anthony Chesworth hit the nail on the head with his views on design-led office space to help excite, entice, and provide a great place for people to come back to work. And you can get in touch with us on social media by using the hashtag LPC20. Now, we're going to talk about city living and the high street. And our third guest is recognised as an international authority on urban place management. He's got more than 25 years experience in the industry, working as a consultant, as a researcher, a place manager, an advocate, and an industry leader. Please welcome the co-founder and co-chair of the Institute of Place Management and the executive director of the High Streets Task Force, Simon Quin. Morning, Simon.
Good morning. Thanks very much for inviting me to this.
No, thanks for joining us. How have the past 6 months been for you?
Well, challenging in many ways, because most of my work is with town and city centres, with the industries that are in there, and they've been facing very difficult times, as we know, and I can share some data later which shows the impact that's been had. But we, as the task force, were set up last year by the government with funding for a 5-year period to support high streets as they changed. So whilst we weren't expecting COVID, we were aware of some of the things that were happening on high streets, the challenges they were facing. And so what we've been able to do in the period where we've been in lockdown is work from home, use our online presence to contact local authorities and others who are facing change and try and help people navigate their way through this.
And like you say, we were already aware that high streets were changing. What's the pandemic done to that rate of change?
Well, I think we've heard this morning already that it's accelerated that change. I think we were more forewarned about what was happening with high streets and hence the interest from government. I mean, back in 2018, the Centre for Retail Research said that we would be losing a quarter of all our stores over a 10-year period to 2022. And that has very clearly been happening, and now obviously is threatened even faster than was originally envisaged. A lot more of those stores were being lost in the Northwest, so quite interesting. They thought that up to 25% of retail outlets would go in the Northwest compared to just 5% in London. And we were seeing associated with that job losses. And again, the British Retail Consortium had suggested we were going to lose 900,000 retail jobs by 2025. Now that was before COVID. So we were aware of the challenge that was coming up. And in some ways we were beginning to be prepared for that. But COVID has made it much more instantaneous.
When you talk about the Northwest losing more than its fair share of stores, why is that? What is it specifically about the Northwest?
I think this is economically based. Alongside the Northwest, Wales, East Midlands were other places which were losing more retailers. Now, obviously, the history of what has been going on in our towns in the sort of 20 years beforehand has been that places have wanted to be on the retail map. And we saw this domination of retail in our town centres. And in the past, multiple retailers perhaps required 250, maybe 300 outlets across the UK to feel they had national coverage. With the rise of online retailing, and obviously the growth of out of town, we saw that requirement for the number of branches fall initially to perhaps 150, and then to 80, and then to 40. So lots of average sized towns that had multiple retailers, where the economy wasn't as strong, they were closing those stores. And footfall was falling accordingly as well. I mean, so we saw over the last 10 years, a 20% drop in high street footfall and a drop in high street spend from 50% in 2000 to just 35% in 2019. So, you know, there's less money, there's less people. It's not surprising that stores are closing.
And you mentioned there specifically towns. Are there challenges that are specific to towns as opposed to cities?
Yes, because on the whole, cities have a bigger range of retail and also things that people want to travel to. So what again is interesting is the way that people are using both towns and cities. In the past, we thought that Christmas shopping was the peak shopping time for most towns, that people went most towns and cities, people went significant distances to do that. Data tells us now people are not using all places the same. And there are only about 19% of our places, some of which are cities, some of which are towns, are main shopping centres. That's the primary reason people go to those places. Others have so many other activities going on. They're multifunctional places where people go in for leisure, for all kinds of other things, education, etc. So the dominance of shopping has gradually been sliding away over the last decade, and other uses are coming into towns and cities.
And we've seen over the past few days, Lancashire's moved into the very high tier of the government restrictions. That will have particular implications for the nighttime economy that had already been hit badly over the past 6 months anyway.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think nationally we were very concerned about the future of hospitality. Quite a number of places had not yet reopened, and those that are reopening, data over the summer has shown that more than half of them are taking less than half of the turnover they had taken last year. And the meaning of this, if things don't change, or as in this case, things deteriorate, is that, again, just over half do not think they'll still be trading in 6 months' time. So we are yet to see the impact of this. I think it's going to be very devastating. We will see lots of businesses just unable to operate, and we will have empty spaces on our high streets.
If you've got any questions for Simon, you can just put them in the chat box on Zoom here. We've had a question, Simon, from Helen Marsh, who is a commercial property partner of Forbes Solicitors. And Helen wants to know, do we expect to see councils stop vehicle use on high streets to create pedestrian spaces and to create a cafe culture on a more long-term permanent basis to help pubs and restaurants facilitate social distancing, thereby creating a lifeline for businesses?
I think that is definitely happening, and we saw particular evidence of this over the summer with the reopening high streets safely, the social distancing measures that were put in place. That is what is interesting from that data, is that though footfall dropped dramatically, obviously with the lockdown down to 89% down on a year ago, in August we saw a peak in the recovery, footfall perhaps only 15% down at its very best day, because people felt confident in returning into town centres. They had the space to spread. It's falling away again now because of obviously the restrictions that are in place now. But I think this will be part of going forward. It will be using the streets much more. The only problem we have is people feel safer going into town centres in cars at the moment than they do in public transport. So I guess what will happen is that we will get eventually the virus under some sort of control, and then the high streets of the future will be places that are for people, because we need to change the way we use vehicles as we tackle climate change. So I think that is the direction for most towns and cities, yes.
And Bipin Patel says, all we see is more charity shops and empty shops in the town centre, and he says in the high street is in many ways dead. What are the other uses for these kind of areas other than focusing on the nighttime economy?
Well, I think we are seeing structural change. I mean, the data I've already given you showed where things were heading. With COVID, it's been accelerated. But what it's also done is, I think, make people realise the challenge that is there for high streets. So the government has, allocated the Future High Street Fund, which is £1 billion. Many of the Towns Fund schemes will also touch on high streets. They, in a way, will only deal with about 100 or 200 of our high streets, when we have well over 1,000 that were dominated by multiple retailers, and several thousand more that serve communities. I think what we will see is the change away from being retail dominated to being more about community hubs. And we will go back in time in some ways before all this retail appeared. So I think we will have health, well-being, fitness kind of things in town centres, because again, we've got to realise our population is ageing. We need to provide care in somewhere which is accessible by a choice of means of transport. I think we'll see education. It's already happening in much more colleges and other things in town centres which generate footfall and activity. We had heard from the last session that there will be these workplaces. And one of the things that the data is telling us is that those who are not travelling into their offices in cities are working from home, are using local centres. And I think it will become natural for space there for 1 day, 2 day a week for people to work in local centres. So this, alongside bringing back civic uses and public uses into town centres, alongside cinemas, leisure, arts, culture, all of those are kind of things. And and housing as well, when we obviously touched on this. I think the center of the future will be actually a little bit more similar to the center of the past. And it will have a diversity of retailing, but in most centers that will be independent retailing or small chains which specialize. We think there are opportunities for markets because, again, there's this whole sense of perhaps eating more locally and using local produce and things. And there'll be opportunities for that to develop both outside in these new pedestrianized spaces and potentially in covered markets elsewhere. So the challenge, I think, for local authorities and the challenge for landowners is to think about the scale of this change and start to put plans together to say, how do you create this? At the moment, we're focused on recovery. And obviously there's steps back that are being taken in certain places as the crisis comes in and the places have to close. But recovery will not be what we had before. It will be a functioning town centres. But really, we've got to start to think about transformation. And that will take 10, 20 years. But it will mean that we are creating different kinds of places. And to get the kind of places that will be sustainable, we have to ensure that the businesses, the property owners, the councils are working with their communities and looking to find how these centres better serve communities.
And when we talk specifically about the high street of the future, how will that impact on the attractiveness of city living?
I think it will have a great impact, really. I mean, quality of life is something that people are realizing much more is important to them. We need to create centres that have the green space, and not contaminated by vehicles passing through it. We need to create places where people can lead different lives. And one of the interesting things about what has been happening in the last 10 years is as town centres have lost their retail offer or have seen it reduced, they started to diversify into places that attract people in an evening. And 35% of our towns now have footfall patterns that show regular evening use, before COVID, obviously. And I think these will be places that people, they may live in apartments, they may live in small townhouses around the town centre, but they will want to use the streets and the spaces and the facilities in an evening. And this is a much more sustainable way of living. You're not having to drive to go to places. You can walk in. Already 16% of the population, according to the ONS, live within 200 metres of a high street. Some of these are quite small high streets, that they're not dominated. So it's not an unusual concept for us. It's just that we lost it in our bigger centres where the retail took over.
We've had a question from Dwayne McEwen, who says, don't you think that local authorities should abolish rates and take a small percentage of the store's profits instead? He says the flagship store and others should be profit centres. The council may then work with the shops and market the town centre together, as opposed to we have a flagship store, here is your rates bill for being here.
Yeah, I mean, reviewing business rates has been obviously a long-term agenda. The amount of money that the state raises from it is so significant that I think in many ways they're loath to go down the route of looking at it. But COVID again has brought all sorts of questions into a shape where people are concerned about the viability of businesses, the viability of property owners, and the whole concept of how funding works. I don't know how we're going to resolve this, but I do think it is time that serious thought is given to it, because the cost of rates is abnormal, particularly for retailers. They pay a greater percentage than other businesses. If those retailers are becoming vulnerable businesses, they're not going to be able to pay these rates in the long term. So we've got to have a fundamental rethink about business rates, about landlord and tenant relationships, about how you let properties, because again, there must be opportunities for temporary uses, for pop-ups, for changing, the use costs have changed so that you can move more easily the use of a property now in town centres. But to make all of this happen, we need good place leadership. We need people to come together and to plan for the future. And those people are not just people in local authorities. It has to include the businesses, the property owners, and the wider community. And they have to think about what kind of place they want to create. And what we're doing as the High Streets Task Force is providing a lot of information to people and data and ideas and sharing what is happening in other places. And also supplying experts who we will be sending into local authorities over the next 4 years to check their ideas, to work with them, because no one has really thought this through before. And it's not surprising, you know, within local authorities, people, as long as they were getting business rate income in and other things, everyone was happy. They're not going to be seeing that in the next few years. We have to really have a bigger rethink.
Simon, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. That is the Executive Director of the High Streets Task Force, Simon Quin.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you, Simon. Now we're moving towards the final panel of today's session. So Simon, sticking with us, but would you please welcome Growth and Prosperity Director at Blackpool Council, Mr. Nick Gerard. Would you welcome Gary Crompton, Director at Barker Proudlove, which is a retail property consultant, and John Chesworth, Exec Chairman at Harrison Drury Solicitors. Please welcome you all. Good morning, everybody. Mindful of what Simon's just been telling us there, but my question still stands. Nick Gerard, is the high street we know still viable?
Well, to an extent, yes, but the thing is that the whole point, it's got to adapt and change. They were struggling before COVID. They've been seriously challenged during COVID. Because many people have asked me, well, how are your plans changing as a result of COVID? And I think the simple answer to that question is the need to accelerate those plans that we had before is what has focused our minds. And if anybody had asked me what the last 6 months has been like, I would say actually one of the busiest 6 months of my entire life. All of the 15,000 miles of commuting that I haven't done over the last 6 months has been filled up with Zoom meetings. The great thing about it has been that actually people that we need to deal with in London and elsewhere, other parts of the country, in Manchester, particularly working in a peripheral coastal location, are now readily accessible. A meeting in London takes 1 hour and doesn't require all that traveling. So as a result of that, we've been able to get people together, work up schemes, drive forward delivery. So if the high street doesn't adapt for the reasons we've said, then yes, it will die, but it needed to before, and it needs to even more so now. And what that adaptation means, certainly speaking from a Blackpool perspective, it's not sufficiently well used by residents of the Fylde Coast. It's not sufficiently well used by the 18 million visitors we get every year coming to all the attractions. Why? Because it's not attractive enough. So we've got a massive investment plan, and much of which is underway, some substantial elements of which are dependent upon Town Deal and Future High Street Fund, which we're sitting here waiting for the phone to ring, so to speak. But I'm optimistic, and I think it's the point I made at the beginning, is about perseverance. There are many reasons to be depressed at the moment. You know, things are going wrong, things that you'd hoped would happen wouldn't. But actually, there's a lot of good news as well happening. And I think what we found is that where we have stuck to our guns, where we have pursued schemes and initiatives, one day their day will come. And certainly in respect of some schemes, that is happening now. So stick with it.
Thank you, Nick. That was lovely. I must pull you up on one thing. There's nothing peripheral about the coastal town that you're representing today.
I was only talking about geographically.
I'll let you off. Gary Crompton, Director at Barker Proudlove, Retail Property Consultant. What's next for town centre retail, Gary?
Well, I think ultimately, the reduction that, as Simon and Nick were alluding to, I think the plans that are in place are something that is not just an immediate shockwave impact of COVID. I think this kind of reduction we've been advocating for quite some time, of getting rid of the scale of development that we obviously went through in the 2000s, and just this idea that retail will always continue, you can build more and more, we will always let this, things like that. There is just a fundamental shift in the way that we're using these things, the growth of the online. That whole side of it has got to be condensed into smaller areas, smaller centres of condensing the footfall in those locations. I think that is ultimately the big physical driver that we've got to see. Alongside it, the element around which Simon touched on, around the framework side of things, around business rates, how that is actually looked at going forward, because clearly there is undoubtedly a feeling on the retailers that we speak to daily around the complete unevenness in terms of the playing field that they're operating in. But also I think there is obviously a big fundamental move in terms of that landlord and tenant side of things, which again Emily was talking about in the office environment, but in retail it's rather than the element of, well, you are just using this space, you will pay X rent. I think the model of long-term leases with zero flexibility, fixed rents are again a thing of the past, where it's the whole shift towards, we're doing a lot more on pop-up retail, independent retail, looking at a bigger shift on turnover rents, which will be a big factor, I think, coming forwards.
Thank you very much. John Chesworth of Harrison Drury Solicitors, and I hope you won't mind me saying advocate, ambassador for Lancashire in many of the things you say and do. I wonder if you could reflect on both of those for me. High street viability in terms of what we know as retail, but also we're going to move this conversation on a little bit to city living. John, what are your views there?
I think that a lot of the points that Simon picked up in the interview with you earlier are really relevant here, and it's the multifunctional element of the towns and cities that we need to look at. Really, I think retail, will be there. Obviously, it will be a part of the mix, but only part of that mix. We've got to expand the floor space that's given to culture, to leisure, to health and education as well, and get the footfall into towns and city centres, not necessarily to go to the shop, but to go to town and the city for another reason. And so I think that is really integral. And I think it's really important as well that this is local led as well, because there's not one template that fits all for every town in Lancashire, let alone every town in the country. And businesses, as Simon said earlier, need to get involved and help shape what they want to see their local towns and cities look like.
Thank you very much. Simon Quin, can I come to you? I want to just expand on a theme. This is sticking with the high streets, but there's a city living element here as well. It's the impact of COVID on the medium term of our cultural offer, of our hospitality offer, of our nighttime offer. This is going to be difficult to recover from. And what advice can we give ourselves to help us recover from that?
It is going to be difficult. And I think really, to be honest, the sense of safety that people are going to be feeling in going into these big venues needs to be engendered either by a vaccine or by certain things that are going to allow quicker monitoring of the health of people going in. It may be that they have tests as they go into these things. But looking slightly longer in the hope that we get beyond this, I think people are going to want to go and experience things again. I think, we've all got bored of being at home in many ways. There's enough work to keep us busy, but that idea of going out and experiencing culture again, art, having time to meet other people is going to be a big driver. And that may start in smaller centres first. I mean, already smaller centres are being used, seeing footfall much higher or closer to past things because people are using it for retailing. And I think local art centres, local culture, local gyms, fitness will start to be used. But eventually we're going to want to go back to cities. Obviously they have their own large populations. And I think the future for city centres is that they are still places that people live in, though a survey by PwC this summer suggests that they may lose over the next 10 years 400,000 in population out of city centres, because people are thinking their next move might well be out to towns and villages. But I think they will have, you know, top brand retailing and top brand entertainment culture and things, and become real destinations. And that's the opportunity for the larger city centres, I think.
Thank you very much. If I might come to you, Nick Gerard. This is a question in from Fahim Patel, who's a developer at Property Selling Solution. We spoke earlier, a few months ago, Nick, when we spoke about the long-term vision of our developers, particularly in the Blackpool area, where there's a massive amount of investment going into the town in various ways. And Fahim's question is, how will the pandemic have an effect on town and city regeneration projects? And I think what I'm trying to find out, Nick, is just how longer term disruption this pandemic is going to cause us in terms of regen.
Yeah, couple of points. Just want to pick up what Simon just said as well. I mean, you know, people are desperate to return to normal life. And when the opportunity provides itself. So in July and August, when effectively places were opened up in Blackpool, our visitor numbers were back up to normal. In fact, beyond normal. We had, for that period, one of our best summers. And there is this pent-up demand. And one of the things that slightly frustrates me is the way that there's a lot of conversations going on as though the pandemic is going to be with us for the rest of our lives. Yeah. We've got permanent adaptation where it is, you know, it won't be, but some of the trends that we've talked about will be accelerated. Now, in terms of the long-term vision, I said, in some senses, has that been affected? In our case, the major developments, like we're talking about at the Enterprise Zone, Blackpool Central, huge investment there, and the Talbot Gateway about employment uses. Those are the schemes that, as I say, have actually kept pace, or in some cases accelerated during COVID, not least because of people's availability. You know, because obviously in developing these major schemes, there's a lot of people to access and talk to. And I think this is where it is really important that people who are trying to regenerate places, whatever the vision that they've developed for that place is, they stick with it. I'll give you an example. Future High Street Fund, originally, I think they wanted fast track schemes in November 19. So we put in a fast track scheme and we said, right, when can we get on with it? Because it really is a fast track scheme. Well, the government abandoned fast track schemes then. Then we had to put in our Future High Street Fund submission this year in July. So we did that. And then we said, how quickly will we get a decision? Well, we still haven't. But then Boris introduced his Getting Building Fund. We want fast track schemes. Well, we said, we've got to. We told you about them a year ago. And we've actually now, thank God, got the money for those. The extension of the Hounshill Shopping Centre to bring IMAX cinema into the town and leisure and restaurant uses into the town centre and to regenerate the market. Had we not stick with that, and I have to say, invested quite a lot of money at our own expense at risk, because we wanted to stick with the vision, we wouldn't have been in a position to take advantage of the opportunity. So the long term, we must, you know, in places, we must stick to our vision, adapt, of course, if necessary, but pursue it with a vengeance and persuade it, and your day will come. Might take a long time, but it will come, provided you've obviously researched it and got the right balance of focus of what you're intending to do to take advantage of these trends that we're talking about today.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move the question on a little bit. And this is a question from Ross Kellett, who's Head of Procurement and Estates at the NCC Group. And Ross says, is there a saturation point for city centre apartments in Lancashire? I think it'd be fair to say that Preston is probably the leader in the county on city centre apartments. And I think we should use the word town centre apartments. But is there a danger of reaching a saturation point? John Chesworth.
I think that there's always a risk. Always, you know, developers aren't daft, are they? They will build stuff that they expect people to buy and the people to live in. I think there's still opportunities, certainly within Preston, to get more occupancy and more people living in the city centre. What we've got to make sure is that they are not just shoeboxes, one bed shoeboxes. We've got to build properties that families can live in, and that people can have proper quality of life in. Now, the Stonygate development in Preston is a good example of a potential there to build an urban village and an urban community which has those aspirations. Let's hope things like that actually get developed. I do feel perhaps at the moment we're seeing too much of the potentially the smaller unit. How many can we cram in? A bit like Wayne was saying earlier on, how many can we cram in to make the biggest buck? I think it's really important that that we use whatever controls we can do to get the quality of the town centre and city centre accommodation right up there, and not just fit as many units in as, what a horrible word, unit to live in. You know, how many homes can we actually create for people to live in?
Thank you very much for that. Simon Quin, I wonder if I could ask you to reflect on that, the idea that, not necessarily saturation point, but how do we ensure the right balance of residential alongside the sort of commercial offer in a town or city centre?
Yes, I mean, this is a challenge, really. Residential seems to be an answer for what you might do in high streets. But if we've had too much residential, it loses that sense of being a high street. It loses the other activities. I mean, Leeds, perhaps 15 years ago, had a glut of these small shoebox apartments developed, which took quite some years to actually flow through the system and get them occupied. And I'm hearing from people around the country that those who've been locked down in these very small flats have not found the experience a very pleasant one. So there may be some turning against these small boxes. People want to, you know, a flat in the city centre is great if you can get outside and do things during most of your non-sleeping time, but perhaps not so if we're, you know, going to go through further periods of restriction. So I think there is about the balance. It is about ensuring that there are other facilities in this centre that people are going to want to live close to. But you know, that is up to each individual local authority when it's thinking about its strategy for the centre, I think.
Thank you very much. I've got a question in from Deborah Smith of Smith and Love Planning Consultants. How do the local authorities, how do our public sector friends help to focus developers, or rather, should they be focusing developers on vacant land in central areas as opposed to the greenfield sites? I think perhaps I better give you the first shout at that, Nick Gerard.
Well, in Blackpool, we haven't actually got huge amounts of green space.
You've got a big sea.
But we have a big sea, yes, exactly, which is very important, actually, a big attractor, as we know. Now, I think the developers, somebody we've been talking about it this morning, clearly need to make money out of their investments. But we have a lot of what I call enlightened developers around nowadays. In other words, aren't just interested in profit, want to make quality developments. Why? Because the thing is that they see that as more sustainable, better for their company's reputation, and actually will help them to prosper in the long term. That's brilliant. But I think the thing is it's engaging with those who share your vision for the. When I say your vision, it depends how your vision for the area is developed. It needs to be developed with others, as I think Simon was talking about earlier. And one of the interesting things about, especially Town Deal, but also FHSF Future High Street Fund, is, you know, the particularly government's giving an emphasis on encouraging places to make sure they engage with that community in developing that vision. But then you present the opportunities. And of course, that is where the opportunities for some of the most exciting developments are actually on the brownfield sites, because they're where the market is, or close to the market, whether it be for leisure, retail, or other uses in our town and city centres. And then being prepared to work creatively, either using your own resources, the public, or what you can access from these special funds, you know, of which there's been a lot with the 6.5 billion Towns Fund, to actually create those opportunities to get people involved. Now, and there are opportunities. We are working with a number of developers to achieve that now, as indeed are many of the other Lancashire towns. So there is opportunity, but you've got to be, it all comes back to having a clear view as to what you actually want to achieve and shape the place that you're living in. Because what we have been told time and time again in Blackpool, so I'm beginning to believe it rather than thinking people are just flattering us because they want an opportunity, is that actually the nature of our strategy and the various elements of it, they're bought into it and they like it. That somebody said about certainty, it gives people confidence. The market likes certainty and they like confidence and they like people with whom they can work. There's all these facets, which I know everybody on this screen, probably most of the people on the call realize that, but it's always does well to remember the various components of achieving successful delivery in our places.
Thank you. And if I may, just to close off this section, I may come to Gary Crompton at Barker Proudlove. Gary, how important to your town centre and your city centre clients is a solid city living offer?
I think that is, again, becoming an increasing part of certainly in the shopping centres that we're working with, that is seen as an element of bringing the people in further, that having that immediate population that you've got there. It's straight away, it is footfall generator, which has always been the biggest thing for these centres, of how do you actually get them, this idea of bringing them directly to the doorstep. That is one major way of getting them there. The challenges that we still face on a lot of these schemes are ultimately the viability of the economics of being able to build in a lot of the northwest towns that we're dealing with. It is still tricky to build a product which is going to be successful longer term, bring in the people that ultimately you would like, and still produce an element of return. I mean, the dynamics are changing given the fact that the retail viability is struggling again and rents are falling, but that is still a major challenge in terms of bridging that gap between ultimately the viability question of these. But it's a major impact in terms of getting people into these centres is going to be more and more of the residential led.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to take one more question, actually, because it's been asked by a couple of people through our chat facility. And this one I'm going to give to you, Nick Gerard, again, if I may. How can we get, I mean, the question has a few lines on it, but I'll give you the edited version. How can we get more local supply chain opportunities for our local businesses in the regeneration projects?
Well, there's a very practical thing is get onto all these procurement frameworks wherever you can, because a lot of the public sector and others use procurement frameworks. The other thing is keep in touch with the people who are providing those opportunities. Local authority often, but obviously there are others as well. And to be honest, one of the huge advantages of the relationship with local suppliers is actually you can get to know the people you're working with. And I have one particular company I have in mind who's been very proactive in engaging with us on various things, and he's been the solution to problems. People are always looking for solutions to the challenges they're facing, and people who come and offer those solutions in a way that meets are the people you want to work with. Sure, there's all public procurement stuff and all of that to go through, but there's many ways of developing that relationship and creating the opportunities. So be proactive. I'm going to open this up to getting loads of calls now, aren't I?
Oh, yes. We're here to create new contacts and new workflow for you, Mr. Gerard. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Nick Gerard, to Simon Quin, to Gary Crompton, and to John Chesworth. Thanks all for that.
Right then, well, that concludes our formal business for the conference. Thanks so much for tuning in and for all your contributions this morning. We hope you found the conference fun and informative. We must say a massive thank you to our speakers, to Wayne Hemingway from HemingwayDesign, to Emily Handslip from Urban Splash, and to Simon Quin from the High Streets Task Force. And also a massive thanks to all of our panellists for their insight and experience. We also should say a massive thanks to today's sponsors, Blackpool Council and Harrison Drury Solicitors. The Lancashire Property Conference will be covered extensively in the November-December issue of Lancashire Business View magazine.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to that, actually, because I'd like to think that today has been the start of conversations rather than the end of conversations. I'd like to think that today leads to the sharing of contacts, and so that we can help those people who have asked us the questions, how can we get more involved in development in Lancashire? So I'd like to think we can generate ideas between us, that we can share resources so that we can work together on the project that's going to deliver for where we live, which is this county. And if I may, Mike, just a couple of things. I haven't written names down next to these, so just a couple of things that sprung to mind from conversations was, let's not be greedy. Let's work together. Let's define our values and stick to them. And if our values in Lancashire are not the same as somebody else's, that's fine. They're our values and let's stick to them. Something that Emily said that really has resonated. Let's not forget that property is there to serve people. Effectively, property is people. We must never take out the people aspect of the property piece. You know, another thing, things are changing. We just don't know how yet. There's so much to go at from today's conversation. As Mike says, we'll be rolling this out over a bunch of pages in the next edition of the magazine, and I look forward to doing that. In the meantime, on behalf of Mike, myself, everybody at Lancashire Business View, our sponsors, our friends at Big Tank for helping us pull this production together, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. But please do stick around. Networking will begin in a couple of minutes when we've slid everybody across to that particular zone. Thanks again.